You've done enough to hurt other people, that's for sure. But you're just sitting there coldly, I don't have anything to say. I don't really give a shit.
You're not me.
No, I certainly am not. Because you know the difference? I have empathy for other people, and I care
No,
about other
you're
people.
not being charged for murder.
I didn't kill anybody either. That's the difference now.
Throughout history, there have been many cases of controversial topics in the realms of media and entertainment. From the culture shock of Elvis Presley and his iconic dance moves, to the emergence of the punk scene in the mid-1970s, there have been many examples of controversy when it comes to trends and the people behind them. Whether it's an opinion of right or wrong, it's no surprise that these type of examples really know how to draw up a crowd and get the attention of an entire nation. Throughout the evolution of entertainment mediums, none have fallen to the level of scrutiny, such as the video game industry. Video games have been in the sights of concerned and outraged parents ever since their inception, and have fallen blame for many different atrocities that have been committed throughout time. Because of the gratuitous violence and adult content that is found in some video games, it's always been an easy target for people who wish to find a reasoning behind the senseless acts of some of history's most depraved. And while it may be easy to push the blame on certain games for exposing a person to that type of content, anyone with a logical sense of thinking knows there's something much deeper going on with those who commit these horrible acts. But that's not to say that every gamer is innocent. For every once in a blue moon, we find ourselves faced with a disturbing outcome to those who fail to separate fantasy from reality. And while it's up for debate whether or not a video game can have an influence upon a person's moral compass, in some rare cases, video games were the exact motive behind a crime. And with October fresh on our calendars, I thought, what better way to kick off the season than with a spooky dose of gaming-related true crime stories? So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at multiple gaming-related cases, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to draw your own conclusion. So ask yourself, do video games create monsters? Let's find out. Other than his birthday of May 15, 1985, not much is known of convicted murderer Deon Moore. A resident of Alabama, future Air Force serviceman, and recent high school graduate, Deon was a seemingly normal young man. And just like any young adult at his age, he enjoyed playing video games. But unfortunately for the families of his victims, his alleged obsession with one certain game may have gone too far. On July 7th of 2003, Deon Moore was arrested by Officer Arnold Strickland on suspicion of a car theft. Deon had no prior criminal history and was seemingly being cooperative throughout his booking process. That was, until he suddenly snapped. According to Deon's own statement, he suddenly lunged towards Officer Strickland, grabbing a hold of his service weapon, and fired 2 shots into the head of the officer, killing him instantly. These shots were then heard by another officer by the name of James Crump, who came running to investigate where the noise was coming from. It was then that Deon had met him in the hallway, fired 3 shots into James, and sadly claimed another officer's life. Moore then slowly surveyed the hallways, gun in hand, searching for whoever else may have been in the building to bear witness to his senseless rampage. It was then he came upon emergency dispatcher Ace Mueller, who was hiding in another office found within the building. Without hesitation, he approached the dispatcher, firing multiple close-range shots, and claimed a third victim. Along the way out of the building, Deon grabbed a set of keys for a police cruiser and fled the scene. The entire situation transpired and ended within minutes. And just like that, Deon Moore went from being just like any other 18-year-old to becoming a cold-blooded killer in the blink of an eye. Now I'm sure you're wondering what this has to do with any video games. And the answer to that comes with the controversy that ensued after Deon Moore's arrest following these events. Shortly after Deon had fled the scene in a police cruiser, he was apprehended and charged with the murders of the 3 victims, as well as for the theft of the police vehicle. When asked about the crimes he had committed, he responded with, "Life is like a video game. Everybody's gotta die, sometime." This answer led to the media and families of the victims to push blame on his love for violent video games, more specifically, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Attorney Jack Thompson, who was a longtime crusader against video game violence, also spoke publicly on how the game's influence may have played part in the crimes that were committed. Mr. Thompson had said, and I quote, "He bought it as a minor. He played it hundreds of hours, which is primarily a cop-killing game. It's our theory, which we think we can prove to a jury in Alabama, that if it weren't for the video game training, he would not have done what he did. The video game industry gave him a cranial menu that popped up in the blink of an eye in that police station, and that menu offered him the split-second decision to kill the officers, shoot them in the head, flee in a police car, just as the game itself trained him to do. The families of the victims decided to file a suit against Sony, Take-Two Interactive, Walmart, and GameStop for their part in the manufacturing and selling of GTA Vice City. Along with attorney Jack Thompson, who had been representing the families in this suit as an out-of-state attorney. But his out-of-state license was soon revoked, as the Alabama judge who exacted this process stated Mr. Thompson's case to be irrelevant, and basically hold no weight with his video game slandering accusations. Many at the time were stating that because of the young age of Devin, his exposure to such a violent game, that it influenced his way of thinking, causing him to rationalize these acts as a normal response. But in reality, the ratio of people who played Vice City and didn't commit atrocities were much higher than those of a special case, such as with Devin. But as always, the media chose to eat this up, and it only fueled the fire of the many anti-gaming controversies of the early 2000s. Overall, Deon Moore had only admitted to killing his victims because he said he didn't want to go to jail, and saw no other way out of it. And although I don't agree that violent video games are healthy in excess to a person of any age, it's obvious that there was something much deeper going on with Deon Moore, and whether it was a defect in his cognitive function or the beginning signs of some serious mental illness, it's safe to say that we can't solely blame video games for his actions. In August of 2005, Deon was convicted as charged, and later in October he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He's currently awaiting his execution in the Holman Correctional Facility of Alabama, and despite many appeals and attempts at downgrading his sentence, his fate still stands, and will one day face judgment for his horrible action. On January 19, 2013, a 911 call was placed in South Valley, New Mexico. This call came from a local resident by the name of Vince Harris. Vince was a pastor also working as security staff at the Calvary Chapel of Albuquerque just earlier that evening, and had grown suspicious about a 15-year-old boy who was also in attendance, all by himself. The name of the boy was Nehemiah Grigo, who along with his family were frequent visitors of the church. When Harris had questioned the boy about his family's whereabouts, he was shocked to hear his disturbing answer. Nehemiah calmly explained to Harris that someone had broken into their home and killed his entire family. Immediately upon hearing this, Harris made a call to police explaining what the young boy had just said to him. Harris then expressed, "When I met Nehemiah, I knew something wasn't right. I could feel it. I could see it in his eyes." It was then at around 8:30 that night the police were dispatched to the Grigo home, where they would discover an incredibly gruesome scene. Greg Grigo, his wife Sarah, and 3 of their children, Zephania, Jael, and Angelina, all were found deceased in their home with multiple gunshot wounds to the body and head. And with Nehemiah being the sole survivor of this brutal attack, the choice was obvious to police as to who their prime suspect would be. After being taken into custody and questioned by the authorities, it wasn't long before Nehemiah had confessed to the killings, and the details surrounding the murders were that of something you would find in a horror movie. Around midnight, Nehemiah had equipped himself with his father's .22 caliber rifle and approached his mother while she was sleeping in her bedroom. He raised the rifle and fired a single shot into her head, killing her instantly. The shot woke up Nehemiah's younger brother, Zephania. Zephania came into the room to investigate what was going on, and that was when Nehemiah told his brother of what he had just done. He murdered his brother in cold blood and moved on to the bedroom of his 2 younger sisters, where he also tragically ended their lives much too soon. Nehemiah then went downstairs after switching out the .22 caliber rifle for an AR-15 and waited downstairs for his father to come home. Greg Grigo was working overnight at a homeless shelter and was generally viewed as an incredible father to his children by all accounts, and that's why it made things all the more shocking that Nehemiah lied in wait for his father for almost 5 hours so that he could execute him as soon as he arrived home. Nehemiah then packed the 2 rifles into a van and drove himself to the very same church where he was later questioned at to meet up with his girlfriend and her family. It was also found that Nehemiah had sent a photo of his dead mother to his girlfriend and was alleged to have been telling multiple members of the church that something had happened to his family, and with seemingly no real motive for committing these crimes. What could have caused Nehemiah to do this? Well, as with most cases involving young killers, the media was set ablaze with many accusing factors as to why such a young man could commit such atrocities. Many news and web articles painted the boy as a video game fanatic who took a special liking to violent video games such as Modern Warfare and Grand Theft Auto. They had also mentioned that the only conversations that seemed to bring any emotion out of him were the ones that involved these video games, which led many people to believe that his love for these games were a contributing factor to his declining mental state. While it's still very much unclear as to why the boy had committed these crimes, he had openly admitted to having both homicidal and suicidal thoughts for some time before he committed the murders. He had also confessed that he had planned on dying in a shootout with police if he had gotten the chance to exact his plan of a mass shooting at his local Walmart. But luckily for the fact of Vince Harris and other members of the Calvary Church taking matters into their own hands, this rampage was able to come to an end before anyone else was harmed or worse. With a tragedy of this magnitude, it really makes you wonder what could have caused Nehemiah to feel the way that he did. And with a seemingly perfect home life, you really just have to wonder where things went wrong. But after everything was said and done, I think we can all agree that something much more sinister than violent video games came into play with this case. Whether it was an underlying factor or some type of trauma that instilled these fantasies into the young boy, it's impossible to find a reasonable answer as to why. But for a young boy who could have had his whole life ahead of him, it really goes to show that looks can be deceiving when it comes to the monsters of our world. The legal proceedings in Nehemiah's case were filled with many twists and turns, given the fact that he was only 15 when he committed these crimes. Ultimately, the judge decided that he would be tried as an adult, and he was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, with 30 years to be served in order to be eligible for parole. Now at 26 years old, Nehemiah is serving his sentence in the Lehigh County Correctional Facility, where he will spend the rest of his adult life with little to no hope of ever seeing the outside world again. Our next tale comes from the faraway land of Mother Russia and begins with a feud between 2 warring clans in the 2003 MMO game by the name of Lineage 2. Now, it's no secret that the entire design behind massively multiplayer online games is to immerse the player and give them an in-depth role-playing experience. Throughout the many hours you'll spend sharpening your avatar's skill set and level, it gives the player a sense of growth within the game world that is hard to come by in other genres of gaming. But that being said, it also comes at no surprise that some of these players may take their time spent in these games a little too seriously. And when the online animosity is transferred into real-life scenarios, that's when things can get scary. And as for the case of 33-year-old Albert, whose last name is unknown, this type of scenario was unfortunately what led to his death. In the late days of December of 2007, an online war between rivaling clans, the Klux Klan and the Plutonium, had ensued. Albert was a member of Plutonium, and his clan were the victors in this battle, resulting in the online death of an unnamed 22-year-old gamer of the opposing faction. This unnamed man took the loss very personally, and although not many details can be found about this case as to what words were exchanged, it's quite obvious that it was personal enough that both Albert and the other young man decided to meet face to face in order to settle this score. Days later, just before the new year, this online confrontation came to fruition in real-life circumstances, in which led to Albert being beaten so badly that he unfortunately died of his injuries en route to the hospital. And a disturbing detail that was later uncovered in this case was found in the motto of the attacker's online clan. Their motto stated, and I quote, "Beat everything that moves and everything that doesn't move. Move and beat. This is one of the rules of the Klux Klan." I mean, talk about taking things too seriously. And to make matters even more disturbing, members of the clan continued to taunt and harass the victim's family even after his death. I think they may have confused the game and reality, and after we buried him on December 31st, they continued to threaten us. Albert's sister Albina was quoted saying in Russia Today. It was around this very same time that multiple other gaming-related crimes were committed in Russia, leading to many news outlets to turn the blame to these video games and question whether or not people were losing touch with reality because of them. It's obvious that these types of cases are a rare occurrence, but it really does come as a shock when they happen, as most online feuds are left in the virtual playground they took place in. For those who can't let something like that go, it's obvious there's something very wrong with that individual, and their obsession with the video game was only a vessel to facilitate their unhinged ways of thinking. As for the 22-year-old man who had committed the attack in this story, it was never publicly released whether or not he was charged for Albert's death or not. But as for the case of the victim's family, I hope they were able to find peace in the heartache this man had created for them. I mean, it kinda makes you think twice about what you say in your online experiences with people. You never know what someone could be capable of. Born on February 13th of 1979 in Oslo, Norway, Anders Behring Breivik was a man who was all too familiar with a life of trouble. With his parents divorcing when he was only 1 year old, he was forced to live with his mother along with his 3 paternal half-siblings in a small apartment in Oslo's Frogner borough. There were many reports of dysfunction in their home, with many neighbors reporting they could hear shouting and other noise between the mother and her children. There were also many accusations that the mother would leave the children alone in the apartment for extended periods of time, which eventually led to questioning being brought by children's services. Multiple reports were made for Anders alone, including a report from a psychologist stating he had a very strange smile, one that was not weighed in emotion, but rather a response to his harsh living conditions. There were also alleged reports of sexual abuse in the home, and despite all of these claims, Anders and his siblings were never removed from the mother's care for good, as most of the cases that were built against the mother had fallen through, leading to him only spending short periods of time with foster families, many of whom also reported strange behavior from Anders while being placed under their care. In his adolescent years, he began to express his rebellious nature in the form of street art, and even became a somewhat prolific graffiti artist in Oslo. He then began using anabolic steroids at a young age, and took his looks very seriously, always wanting to appear big and strong. What was even more peculiar about Anders was the duality of his personality. While most co-workers and classmates of his would say he was a very charming and respectful young man, some of his closest friends and family would say the opposite, stating he had an ego about him and was too concerned about superficial looks and ideals. But no one could have ever predicted the depravity that was unfolding in the mind of Anders Breivik. At the age of 23, Anders was working 2 jobs to fund a devious plan he had been fantasizing about. He started a computer programming business which eventually went bankrupt, leading him to move back in with his mother, where he was said to have become isolated and withdrawn. He was alleged to have spent the majority of his time playing World of Warcraft, and really had no social life outside of a virtual world. It seemed as though Anders had given up on any true ambition for a normal life, and it became apparent as to why in later years. On July 22, 2011 at 3:25 p.m., a car bomb explosion had been detonated next to a tower block on which the Prime Minister at the time, Jens Stoltenberg, had an office. This explosion led to the deaths of 8 civilians and also caused 209 to be injured, 12 of which severely. Less than 2 hours later, Anders had disguised himself in a police uniform and boarded a ferry to the Norwegian islands of Utøya. This island was the location of the Norwegian Labour Party's youth camp and was in attendance of over 600 teenagers and staff at the time. When Anders arrived on the island, he stated that he was there for a routine check, following the bombing that had just occurred hours earlier. Once he was met by the camp leader Monica Bose, she became suspicious of Breivik and his uniform, which led to her contacting security, which provoked Anders into killing both her and the security guard who came to respond. And so began one of the most heinous acts of terrorism in Norway's entire history. He walked around the island signaling all those in attendance to gather around him, in which he then pulled out his weapons, a .223 caliber Mini 14 semi-automatic rifle and a Glock 34 pistol, and began firing indiscriminately into the crowd. It was pure chaos on the island, as many of his victims were shot trying to escape either by swimming from the island or from pretending to be dead. It was later revealed that Anders was there to target the former Prime Minister, who was just there to give a speech hours earlier. But due to a delay in the railway station that he used to reach the ferry to the island, it was too late. Because of this attack taking place on an island, it led to a shortage in transport for the police to be able to arrive on scene, which led to crucial time being lost while Anders continued his murderous rampage, which ended up lasting over an hour. When the police finally made their way to the location of the attacks, they made contact with Breivik, where he laid his weapons down and surrendered to the police after initial hesitation. And why they didn't just blow this guy away is honestly beyond me, but I'm sure they wanted answers. The attack led to the deaths of 77 people, 69 of which were on the island and over 320 plus were injured. The motive behind the attacks were found to be in the radical beliefs of Anders and his xenophobic view on society. He was known to have militant far-right ideology and identified himself as a fascist of sorts. All in all, this was supposed to make some type of statement for his anti-Muslim beliefs, as the Labour Party who were targeted in his attacks were that of a progressive and social democratic ideology. He later stated that these killings were also done in sacrifice to the mythological entity by the name of Odin, whose name was also found to be inscribed on the bayonet of his Mini 14 rifle, used in the killings. Throughout the course of his trial, the jury was often met with many strange writings from Anders' manifesto, which essentially explained all the events leading up to the attack. In this manifesto, he liked to mention World of Warcraft as a means for distraction between his family and friends. He also stated during his trial that he had learned to shoot so well due to his time spent playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare. It was apparent that these were just an easy cop-out for Breivik, as we all know that using a video game as a training tool is a ludicrous idea. But either way, these claims took the media by storm, which led to many gamers all over the world shutting the claims down, and with good reason. He was convicted of all 77 counts of murder and was given the maximum sentence of 21 years with the possibility of a 5-year extension so long as he's still considered a danger to society. And given that this was the only way for Norway to give someone a life sentence, I'm in good faith that they'll be giving him plenty of extensions in the future. And so will Big Bubba. It was obvious that in the case of Anders Breivik, something should have been done about his behaviors much earlier in life. Maybe then could things have been different. But as for the link and his obsession with video games and far-right extremism, I'd say they have nothing to do with each other. It was a tragedy that unfolded on that fateful day of July 22nd, and many different memorials were constructed in honor of the victims and those who had helped in escaping the attack. It was a day that will forever be in the minds of the Norwegian populace, and hopefully a reminder to anyone who has taken notice of troubling signs in someone they may know. Or it may not be the video games that have created these monsters, but something much deeper than what is found to be on the surface.